Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist. And only an hour ago, I had no idea what I was going to talk about. And then I was scrolling on Instagram and I saw a post by Harriet Frew, aka the eating disorder therapist. She's got a podcast by the same name. It's great, go check it out. She'd put up a post saying, "Do you rebel against your own food rules?" And when I read that, I was like, yes I do. And I thought it would be a great idea for a video to talk about the link between binge eating and that rebellious part of us. But if we're bringing these two things together, what is it that we're even rebelling against? It doesn't seem to make sense, right? We're the only ones who seem to be getting hurt by this behavior. So what on earth could we actually be rebelling against? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to try and talk about that in this video. Not try, I am going to talk about it in this video. There's something about that moment going into a binge where you feel released from constraints and should and noise in your head, and it can feel like a real sense of almost sticking up two fingers to the world. But maybe even it can feel like sticking up two fingers to yourself sometimes, because part of you is going, this is not a good idea, but you can't seem to help yourself from acting out this behavior. I looked up what it means to rebel, and it said that to rebel is to resist authority, control, and/or convention. So I've been thinking about these three words, authority, control, and convention. If we're rebelling against these three things, one of them or all of them, what might that look like with food? The first one that jumps out to me is control, because we talk about control a lot in the disordered eating world. Now, control is about a lack of choice. It's about tight parameters and hard lines where this side of the line is good and this side of the line is bad. And I've spoken before about Janine Roth's concepts of the restrictors and the permitters. Just to briefly recap, the restrictors are those that have a much more controlled relationship with food. They're the ones who tend to be in control, perhaps the majority of the time, but they're still binging occasionally. For these people, the fear is being out of control. That's the fear, that's what they want to avoid more than anything. And then for those of us that are more at the permissive end of the scale, less so much about the restriction, but more about the binging, what tends to be the most overriding fear is the fear of being controlled. And this makes so much sense to me, because even my own expectations could, and still sometimes do, feel like this external control that I want to rebel against. I've always said I wasn't somebody who was good at following diets. But I didn't think that I was even trying to diet, because I was usually trying to set my own rules. So I'm not dieting, I'm not restricting, I'm just not eating sugar. And it didn't last very long. When you are in the chaos, control is really appealing. And if you've been in the chaos for a period of time and you manage to get in control for a bit, to begin with, that control feels like freedom until it doesn't. Because at some point, that control, those rules around you that made you feel safe for a bit, start to feel like a prison. And rebellion is all about freedom. It's all about autonomy. It's all about wanting to be able to choose and have some control and power over the direction of our lives. And so if we hop onto this idea of authority, if you think we're born into a world surrounded by people that have this authority over us. And they tell us how we should behave and what we should do, what we should want, even how we should think and feel. All these messages are passed to us in childhood. If you think of a 2 to 3-year-old, they are a bundle of their own wants and desires and wishes. And a lot of the time they're being constantly told, put that down, don't touch that, come here and put this on, we're going out, let the other kid have a go on that. And that was us once. We had all these desires and wishes that seem to get thwarted all the time. We're not allowed to do this, we can't do that. And there's a reason why we need to learn a lot of these things that we are not really supposed to do. We live in a world that is a social world, and we need to be able to cooperate with one another. So learning that lesson that it isn't all about what we desire and what we wish is an important lesson to learn in order for us to have relationships with people. That said, what many of us receive is the message that what we want and what we desire is not okay. We have to conform and comply with other people's expectations, and it goes beyond just what we needed to learn in order to get along in the world. And if you can't remember what that was like for you as a kid, have a look at your relationship with authority now. How do you feel about those people who have power over you? My experience has left me with a sense of not trusting authority. And so I don't go into battle with authority either. I tend to just kind of hide. There's a passivity that comes over me around authority where I just want to get out the way. I don't want to be noticed by authority. So what would that look like in terms of my relationship with food? I think I was more avoidant, and I would have insisted that I'm absolutely fine apart from this eating thing. My self-esteem's good, everything's fine about me apart from this eating thing, because I was compartmentalizing all my problems into that. Anyway, I digress. But if we're thinking about this idea of authority and thinking that your binge eating might feel like this rebellion against that, I've met a number of people who share a similar story. And the story is that growing up, their parents were telling them that they needed to lose weight and they were controlling their food. And later on in life, they're still struggling with food, they're still in a bigger body, they desperately want to lose weight, but there's a part of them that feels like if they did lose the weight, that somehow their parents would win. And they recognize that this is not a rational thing in the here and now, but if you had a controlling or authoritative parent that's trying to control things, when you are rebelling later in life, it can feel like you're doing the rebellion that you couldn't necessarily do back then because you didn't have the power to do it then. So sometimes perhaps when we're rebelling against figures of the past. We're trying to do now what we couldn't do back then. And then to touch on the third one, which was convention, this idea of rebelling against convention, that for me encompasses diet culture, right? Rebellion is not necessarily a bad thing. And even the idea of convention, when I heard that word, I thought of conventional wisdom. And I thought of all the people that find themselves rebelling against conventional wisdom around food. So that idea that, I don't know, you're supposed to eat a certain number of servings of fruits and vegetables a day. And so there's a sense of rebelling against what you think you should do. Because if you think you should eat a certain way, you're much less likely to actually want to. And this is why that autonomy piece and the choice piece is so important. Because when we feel like we have choices, we can listen to conventional wisdom that could be useful to us in some degree, but we feel like we hear it and we go, okay, I want that. You know, like as a 2-3-year-old, not being allowed what you want, but to listen to something and go, I want that for me, compared to listening to something and going, oh my goodness, that's what I should be doing and I'm not. If we are going to be able to break free from this rebellion that is harming us, I think there's a few things that we need to think about. One, I've said it a few times already, but there's something about creating a sense of choice and owning your autonomy. Because quite often our rebellious part is like a younger part that is rebelling at a time when we didn't have that autonomy. We do have it now, we just don't always feel like we do. And in order to be able to make choices feel like choices, this is what needs to happen. You need to challenge the idea that there is a right thing to do in a given situation. You know, if we stick to food for a moment, if you think in any situation there is a right choice to make, you are going to wake up the rebel because that should is going to be in your mind, and you're going to feel like it's not really a choice because you should choose this thing, not that thing. There are, of course, different consequences to decisions, and some outcomes may feel preferable to you. But if you choose that outcome because you really believe that you want the preferable answer for yourself, that's going to make it easier to make that choice. But you can't make a choice unless the other choice is also a choice. So I choose not to binge. And I think I will probably always choose not to binge. But unless it's an option to binge, I can't choose freedom. And I want to end on a quote by a guy called Thomas Brosnan. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and he said, people are not resistant to change. They are resistant to being changed. This stuff is inner work, and it's one of the reasons why I don't run programs on this. You run a program about how to quit binge eating, and you are having to follow what somebody else tells you to do. And maybe that works brilliantly for some people. I'm obviously very biased and influenced by my own experiences, so I'm going to continue to share from that perspective. But if you're still kind of struggling with this idea of choices, I highly recommend checking out this video to have a look at how you can make choices and say no to food and it still feel like a choice, because that is the most important part. But thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.